Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. We're expecting quite a large audience today, so we'll just wait a couple of minutes until everyone joins. But I see the participants tab rapidly growing. So let's give people a chance to get into the room. I hope you are in the right place. This is the Circular Economy and Behavior Change. Hi, welcome. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Hi, Alexander. Hi from Glasgow. Hi, Stuart. Morning, Usha. Hi, Isabella. Hi, Angela. Hi, Wana. Good morning. We'll just make a start in just a minute. Let's give people a chance to come on live into this room. Hi, all. Hi, Victoria. Hi, Tobe. Hi, Mary. Oh, sunny Wallingford. That's nice. Hi, Michael. Morning, everyone. Hi, Gary. All right. I think we're still waiting for people, but we can actually make a start. This is a recorded session. So hi, welcome. Welcome to Circular Economy and Behavior Change. This is our second webinar in a series that where we look at the role of behavior change interventions across industry in various businesses. These events are in collaboration with ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, to bring actionable social science insights to business challenges. And today we're talking about circular economy. My name is Alexandra Juguranu. I'm from KTN. And in my day-to-day, I explore the role of social sciences in business. And today I'm truly excited to partner with the Circular Economy Innovation Network to bring you this session. We have some amazing speakers, and our excellent chair today is my colleague, Elle Runton, who leads the network. Now, before passing on to her for the rest of the session, just a few housekeeping rules from me. You'll see that your audio is muted and your video is turned off. You can use the chat to report any technical issues you're having to Michael Foster, who's the facilitator for this webinar, and also for introducing yourselves and making any comments that you may wish. But please use the Q&A to submit any questions that you have for our speakers, because we will collate all of these questions and answer as many as we have time for in the dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And as a bonus, for the 3 top voted questions in the Q&A, we are giving away 3 copies of a really good book called The Circular Economy User's Guide by Walter Stahel. So remember to upvote your favorite questions, and if you're one of the lucky 3 people with upvoted questions, you'll receive this book by post. This session is being recorded, and a recording with any additional event materials will be sent to you in due course. Now, that's all from me. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoy the session. Elle, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am very excited about the content and the speakers that we have, and judging by the number of you that have dialed in this morning, you're equally as excited. I'm going to introduce our panelists and our experts, and starting with Zanita. Zanita is a Circular Economy Impact Fellow at the Circular Economy Hub. Focuses on developing and evaluating circular economy interventions. Zanita has a background in design engineering and human behaviour for the circular economy, and her interests specialise on people's circular journeys and the system interventions that are needed to facilitate them. Zanita was joined by Mirren, And Merrin is a research fellow within Exeter Centre for Circular Economy and primarily engages in industry-led research that helps companies to improve sustainability and the circularity of their products, services and operations. Merrin's a designer by background, and she has experience in circular design, emotionally durable design, design thinking and business modelling. So very much looking forward to hearing from Zanita and Merrin. And I'm delighted today that we are joined by Professor Peter Hopkinson from the Circular Economy at the University of Exeter Business School. Peter set up the Exeter Centre in 2017 and since 2020 has been the co-director of the UKRI NICER programme, and we'll hear a little bit about that. And alongside fellow director Professor Fiona Charnley. What's wonderful news, I think, is that last week Exeter was named the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's first global university partner, building on its status as a global pioneer for circular economy since 2017. And I am delighted to tell you that thanks to Professor Hopkinson and the team, we are able to give away one place for somebody today to join the next Circular Economy Masterclass, which will start in January. I'm really excited about that. There will be some information following. We will send out an email about how to register and whether or not you would be successful in securing that place. But we'll also be asking for feedback from today and probably a quick paragraph of why that will benefit you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Peter Hopkinson, and he will start to take us through that session. Peter, thank you.
Great, thanks, Al. We've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to crack on. So next slide, please, Merrin. This is what we're going to try and cover. If we overrun, we're going to cut one or two bits out, but just going to say something about the NICER programme. I'm going to say something about behaviour change in the context of circular economy. Merrin and Janetta will give you some in-depth around particular theories, methodologies and practical application. And if we have time, I'll come in at the end and do a case study that I think sort of exemplifies a lot of what we're saying between us. Next slide. Many of you will know the NICER programme. If you don't, go to the cehub.org. Already said it's a £30 million programme over 4 years. We're just coming to the end of year 2. 5 national centres, textiles, minerals, metals, technology, metals and chemicals, and then a hub that Fiona and I and the team coordinate. And the aim is to try and drive and accelerate and upscale circular economy research and innovation towards the UK economy. It also has an international remit. So we'd be delighted if you can join us in future events and go onto the web and sort of sign up to our newsletter and other things. Next slide, please. Just to say, it's a big programme, 34 universities, 64 academics, a lot of early career researchers, etc., etc. So delighted that I Innovate and ESRC came to us and said, would we be interested in doing a piece on behaviour change and the circular economy? Yes, we would. It's a really hot topic, as everybody knows, and it's pretty complex and challenging, as we'll discuss, I think, over the next hour or so. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to try and define the circular economy. Everybody knows there's several hundred definitions. You've all got your own pet version. But basically what we're trying to do is move away from a linear economy, take, make, dispose. Other people use 3 different words for that. But basically we've created a global industrial economy that sort of is sort of extractive, depletive, degenerative. And if we don't do something different in the future, we won't have an economy. We'll die out as a species, and we're doing a pretty good job on that already. What I tend to refer to are guiding principles, which I find more helpful for when we try to judge whether something is or isn't a circular economy or a circular economy application. And some of the principles we work to are things like it's an economy that's restorative by intent. It's designing out waste at the outset. We're trying to regenerate natural capital, not degenerate it. We're trying to increase resource productivity. So if we're using resources, we want a factor 10 minimum improvement, probably need a factor 100, if I was being honest. And we need to decouple material throughput and material consumption from measures of growth and eliminate hazardous and toxic substances. They're just some of the principles. There are many others, and you might want to pick up on those in the Q&A. Next slide, please. And so the circular economy is quite a complex idea, and when you come to behaviour change, it's equally complex, and trying to cover the breadth of behavioural change theories in an hour is really impossible. So this is a really good paper, I think, that shows through a systematic review 62 major behavioural change theories. You might recognise your own in here, you may have others. So we're just going to sort of touch on some of the areas that we found useful working in the consumer experience, but also right across the value chain and right across the circular economy system as a whole. So I direct you to that paper if you want to sort of get an overview of what's been written on this topic. Next slide, please. What I find useful, and the people I'm working with find useful, is to think about four key interventions and 4 key building blocks that have to be applied in any particular context to drive circularity. So we need to do something about product and service design at the outset. That's the design outways. We have to introduce new business models. It has to work. It has to be able to outperform the linear model, the sales transaction model, else it won't scale. We need to give attention to reverse cycles and cascades. We need to bring stuff back. And this really important, what we call system enablers, everything else, finance, regulation, education, communication, training, policy, et cetera, that creates and defines the system of interest. And if we don't put those together in a coherent and systemic way, often the solutions and the interventions that are being proposed won't work. Behavior sits in all those circles. It's really important as a system enabler in its own right, but it also means that we've got to change the behavior of designers, people involved in business model, people involved in reverse logistics. So I just want to say in a couple more slides, just a couple of early examples to show what we mean by that. Next slide, please. So we do a lot of work with businesses and companies. One of my favorite is Renault. And the point I'm making here is, a lot of interest in the circular economy is about changing material inputs. And many of those are happening now at scale, but we don't know about them. The consumer doesn't know. And the question is, does the consumer need to know? So these are design changes or business model changes that are happening in front of us. So this is about how Renault has introduced significant expansion of recycled polymer and textile use in its car. And it's only now that they've started to put those recycled materials into products that the consumer interacts with. They can see them, they sit on them, they can smell them. So it's beginning to change the way they're having to think about behavior and consumer behavior, whereas previously it's been embedded in the original product. Next slide, please. Remanufacturing is a well-known model. It's a well-known model, and Renault's built a 1 billion circular economy business model over the past 10 years, 1 billion euros per year, and it's scaling rapidly. One of the key parts of this is remanufactured components. And what's great about remanufactured components is that they're of the same quality, they're cheaper, and they have a massively reduced environmental impact. That is now a standard Renault exchange offer. If you want a spare part, you get a remanufactured part. In theory, everybody should win from that solution. It's not the full circle, but it's a really good example of what's happening behind the scenes at scale in a lot of global businesses. Next slide, please. Last one before I hand over to Mary. But of course, that even in these situations, every case is different. So this is an early case that we're involved in with Ricoh, the world's largest print and document company. They introduced remanufactured printers back in 1994, but by 2010, they were beginning to scale. What they were finding that even though the printer was cheaper and had a much lower environmental footprint, the consumer was beginning to question their quality. And so they couldn't scale the business because there was huge consumer resistance. It was labeled as secondhand, not as good as new. And it was the role of regulation and certification that through the British Standards Institute that enabled them to overcome that resistance. So they were able to apply that standard to their machines, which overcame that resistance and led them to get a takeoff with their consumer base from 2010 onwards through to today. So I'm going to come back to another case. I'm going to hand this over now to Merin, who's going to talk you through the consumer experience piece.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a project that I'm leading with a company called Claris's. And what we're doing is we're trying to understand, what is the consumer or customer experience when engaging with circular products and services. The main motivation for why we engaged in this project is that, both of us from an academic, but also from Claris's, our practitioner side, they felt that there is a little bit of underexplored area within this research and within practice. And we really wanted to dig into this a little bit more because, we really felt that this sort of customer experience angle is something that might be potentially affecting the sort of the adoption of a lot of these really interesting circular products and services. And so when we talk about experience, we talk about the whole experience, and behavior is a big part of that. So the actions that we do when we interact with products and services, but there are lots of other sort of elements to that, such as our attitudes, our perceptions, our willingness to engage. There's that sort of sensory experience around the aesthetics and the materiality of the product. There's the affective experience, such as our emotions and our feelings and meaning. And it's important to take those into account when you're sort of really trying to understand what are people's experiences of products and services. We're looking at two different sectors. We're looking at consumer products, so sort of high involvement goods. These would be stuff that you would buy less frequently and keep for longer periods of time, and sort of low involvement goods such as food and beverage. So these are things that you would buy very often and would approach it sort of differently when thinking about purchasing these types of products. And we separated them because we felt that the experience of each of these products for circular products and services is quite different. And we want to also highlight that, we're not just looking at that B2C experience. We really want to understand the sort of the B to B to C. Because when we develop circular products and services, there's always going to be a wider network of actors that make that product circular. So it's important that we understand, what's the holistic experience of everybody involved. And so, and when we think about experience, we know that the behavior is a big part of that. And I think a lot of people on the call will be aware that there is a big attitude behavior gap. So we need to look beyond attitudes and we need to understand what those are. But then we need to understand what is this gap? Why is there a gap here in terms of what people are doing? And we're hoping that our work sort of situates ourselves a little bit and understands this gap a little bit better. We also know that there are many different things that influence, the way in which people behave. These can be psychological, these can be about our beliefs, our perceptions of products or services or companies. They can be personal, they can be about, where we are in our lives, what our jobs are, what our economic circumstances are. They could be social, they could be about our friends or our family, or they can be cultural. And so, we want to just highlight that, you need to be aware of all these different factors that do influence the way in which people interact and engage with the different kinds of products and services. And so this is the sort of overall aim of our project. It's industry-led. We're working with a number of different, large and small brands who are either exploring circular products and services or have various products and services already on the market. And our overall objective is that we want to develop new kind of customer experience design tools that really help companies to sort of develop those really winning circular value propositions that really do meet the expectations of their customers, but also in a circular way. The work that we've done to date is that we did a scoping review earlier in the year, which is available to download from this QR code here. This sort of outlines some of our initial thinking and our findings from that review, which we've really used to sort of shape how we're doing the research. We're right in the middle of the research right now. We're in the middle of data gathering, so our thinking is constantly evolving. But our expected outcomes is that we really want to understand what are those friction points, what are those pain points of experience when sort of engaging with circular products and services. What are those real key design considerations you need to think about when shaping those particular journeys and products and services. We want to create the sort of circular playbook that companies can use. But we're also sort of developing a little bit of a network of companies and academics who are sort of interested in this particular type of research. And so just to touch on some of the kind of initial observations that we're seeing in the work, it sort of came down to sort of three key things. So when engaging with circular products and services, we felt that we're essentially asking customers to do new roles. This is then resulting in them needing to perform new types or types of relearned behaviors, which is ultimately resulting in kind of these new relationships that are being formed between producers, consumers, and ultimately products as well. So if we sort of dive into what are these new customer roles, a lot of the literature is talking about this sort of activated consumer, this activated citizen who is involved in the sort of co-creation and maintaining of these products. We're moving from this idea of sort of this ownership to sort of more stewardship. So, we're asking people to actively care for and maintain products, perhaps products they're not even going to own themselves. And so we're sort of asking customers to be these sort of like maintainers of value through the life cycle of these products across their value chain. And so we're trying to understand, what does this really mean for them? And so these new roles then imply new types of behaviors. So for example, with products such as Loop, we're asking people to return products and packaging. We're asking, for things like Fairphone, we're asking people to maintain and repair products. And so we need to be aware of like, what are these behaviors? And then what does this mean for people? Do people have the capital? Do they have the money to be able to repair these products themselves? Do they have the right skills? Do they have the time? Do they have the knowledge? While also trying to understand, okay, so if we're asking people to rent, borrow and buy, products as well, what does this mean for people? What are their perceptions of this, and how can we get them to understand, the benefits of these sorts of models? But then, when we're moving into these new relationships between products, consumers and producers, we're moving from this sort of linear transactional relationships to something that is more long lasting. And has the potential to sort of develop value over time. And so we're just trying to be aware of all of those different elements. And so another kind of key concept that came up in the research, this idea of consumption work. And we felt this sort of helped to really frame some of the thinking that we've been having around this. And consumption work is just defined as all the work necessary for the purchase, use, reuse, disposal of consumption goods and services. And it kind of really asks some really interesting questions like, is there fundamentally additional work and effort that is required to make products more sustainable and more circular? Is that true? Who is doing this work? Is it producers? Is it consumers? Is it your wider community? Is it council? Where is the division of labor of making these particular products and services circular? And then what does this really mean for people? What are they capable of doing? Do they have the right skills and the knowledge to make their products circular, to repair them? Are they willing to do it? Do they have the time and the money? And what kind of trade-offs are really worth it to them? How do we incentivize people to engage with these types of products and services? And so when these come through, lastly, into sort of different kind of consideration, these are some of the sort of themes that are coming up at the moment. First one is definitely about price. People are still very sensitive to price, especially in the current economic climate that we're in right now. And if there is going to be a new behavior, what some people have said to us is there needs to be a significant kind of price difference in the offering in order to facilitate a different kind of action or behavior. There's still being a little bit of a conversation or tension around price and quality and what those two things mean together. There's a lot of things around trust and confidence, not only in a product, especially if it's sort of secondhand or repaired, but also in the brand and what they're saying and the authenticity of what they're offering. Convenience is often cited as a big barrier to a lot of these circular products and services. We're trying to unpick what convenience really means. I mean, is being circular inherently inconvenient? Is it not? I don't know. That's a really interesting question. And I'd ask, a lot of you to think about whether or not you think that is true. But also being aware that, the identity of people and influences a lot of how they consume. So just being aware of that factor and what it means, as well as the different kind of language and messaging we use in order to facilitate these different kinds of actions or behaviors we might need, or communicate about, the different kind of benefits that a product might offer. And then lastly, just trying to be aware of, like, again, as I said, what are these skills and this knowledge we need people to have in order to engage with circular products and services. As Peter said, do consumers need to know? Maybe not about everything, but if their role is to help a product be circular in order to meet its sort of circular destiny of sorts, then perhaps they might need to be aware. And so we need to sort of understand that interaction a little bit more. And I just wanted to touch finally on, I've been talking about developing these new methods and tools, and I just wanted to sort of highlight where we see these tools being used. So firstly, we're using sort of all of this thinking to really, in this first phase of the design, the discovery research, to really understand, what are these behaviors that people are doing when interacting with services, where are they happening, why are they happening, so that we know that we're solving the right problem. So then moving into the second phase of design, then, we're going to use this thinking to then shape and design the right design interventions to ensure that things are circular, so that we are designing the right solution to meet the right kinds of needs for people. These are just an example of some of the intervention frameworks we're thinking about and that we're using to shape our thinking. The combi model, so the sort of the things around capability and motivation, opportunity, as well as a model that I developed around called emotional durability, which is all about kind of understanding how you can use emotion as a way to encourage people to engage and become emotionally connected to products for longer, to encourage sustainable practice. But we're looking at loads and loads of other tools around personas, journey mapping, and going to be hopefully shaping and developing these over time. So if you're interested in the research, you want to get involved, please do get in contact either with myself or with Sam Maguire at Claris's. We'd be very happy to speak to anybody who's doing any work in this space. But I'm now going to hand over to Shanetta.
Thank you, Maren. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. My work combines the themes of design engineering and human behavior in the context of developing and evaluating circular economy systems. And in my early work, I used some of the behavioral theories Maren mentioned that focused on understanding perceptions, attitudes, perceived abilities, and how these can influence the behavior of actors in circular systems. And so I studied those in the context of refurbishment, remanufacturing and recycling, and we still now adopt the combi model in our research in the CE Hub that looks at household behavior in circular economy. And a few years back, I began to study people's journeys in circular systems, such as in the reuse of fast-moving consumer goods. And so I'm really curious to understand how these journeys unfold, how they can influence how our systems are designed, and opposite, how they can be influenced by the design of our systems. And so ultimately, as we can see, consumers, and as we know, in circular systems undertake a journey through a variety of settings during which they are able to participate in the consumption phase of a specific circular system, such as reuse, shown here of a durable packaging like the coffee cup you see. And this perspective on the consumer journey is slowly emerging in circular economy research, such as in researching activities associated or required of consumers in revalorization services of FMCGs. Next slide, please. And so now looking into the behavior chains. So when we zoom into that journey, we will see that it is built from a sequence of behaviors. And in that sequence, the completion of one behavior leads to performance of another behavior. And this is in order to reach an ultimate goal of the chain. And that sequence we call a behavior chain. And so having a deeper understanding of how behavior chains are performed is very useful to inform research, for example, in identifying how specific circular behaviors unfold and which aspects of the behavior chain we may want to study, or it is also useful in business innovation. And having this broad perspective can inform how do we envisage our consumer will participate in a novel system, and to what extent do we need them to change behaviors, and even can help to inform whether and how we could align with people's daily routines to help them on board with the circular consumption systems in a more gentle way. Next slide, please. Thanks. And one key attribute of behavior change are behavioral influences, both of which are intrinsic and extrinsic. And those stimulate the directions we take as consumers at different points of our journey. And so the intrinsic influences can be motivational factors such as values, perceptions, perceived ability, or even physiological aspects such as hunger or fatigue. And the extrinsic can be system elements that enable, instruct, or nudge our behavior. And it's important to consider that both intrinsic and extrinsic factors have an influence on not just one behavior in a chain, but to extent are likely to influence all behaviors across our journey. And what you can see on this slide are 4 examples of offerings that currently operate in the FMCG space and provide the consumer with an option to sequentially reuse products. And just to provide some examples of the kind of extrinsic influences there are of the return behavior. Starting from the left, we have a diaper reuse service called Washcott, which is based in Belgium. And to enable return behavior here, they provide the consumer with a return bag and collection service. We also have here SodaStream gas canister return scheme that nudges return behavior through deposit consumer needs to bear at the point of acquisition. In the third position, we have Cozy Cosmetics offering, which operates in France. And here, the consumers are also influenced by a deposit they bear on the acquisition of a reusable container, which they return back to the store. And finally, we have pre-filled packaging system called Loop, which also provides the consumer with a tote bag and a collection service of returnable packaging. And so consumer intrinsic motivation here and other systems can still play the role. And although those systems are designed to enable the return behavior, there is still an opportunity for the consumer to go down the alternative path, such as here disposal. Next slide, please. And so in addition to there being intrinsic and extrinsic influences, behavior change inherently have a set of attributes that are useful to understand when adopting this perspective into research and innovation. And so examples include there being a geographical distance between one behavior and another, time it takes to perform a single action or a section of a chain. There are also dependencies between behavior that happens indirectly. There are return loops and a number of repetitions that may be required of the consumer to perform, say, reuse behavior to ensure that products are utilized for enough times to offset the environmental impacts associated with their production, and many others. One key one I think that we have on this slide is additional element of effort associated with performing each of these behaviors, as well as forking paths, really important, which signify moments we may want to identify when there may be an opportunity for the consumer to come off the circular journey and participate in an alternative linear system instead. Next slide, please. And so in previous work with colleagues, we researched attributes of circular journeys and developed an overview of those across 8 categories, and that's on the left-hand side. And if you would like to read further, we use the chain perspective in research where we identified types of reuse models currently adopted in the FMCG sector. So the example graphic is on the right-hand side with references at the bottom. Next slide, please. And so just before I close, I'd like to expand on this perspective of behavior change. And so what you can see here is that the consumer journey is only a component of a broader circular system. And the consumer journey is also performed here with other actors within the consumption phase, such as exemplified here at the point of refill and return. Next slide, please. And so ultimately, the behavior chain is carried out even further and shared with other actors, including, for example, refillers, retailers, distributors, even designers, collectors, and so on. And so each of these actors have a specific role in guiding the resource flow in the system, and each are influenced by the intrinsic and extrinsic factors. And so part of the extrinsic factors are their relationships with each other, and dependencies on their behaviors. And so what you can see here, we have actors and their behaviors that directly influence and interact with resources. So that's in blue, direct influence. And we can also see there are further levels of influence, such as at level 2 and 3, there are actors and their behaviors that do not directly interact with resources, but influence the behavior of other actors, such as, for example, by generating business policies or even regulations at level 3. And so just going to the final slide, Maren. Thank you. So finally here, the circular systems are complex, and I am drawing in my current work on the actor network theory, complex adaptive systems, and socio-technical systems theory to understand further these networks and the design of circular systems that are largely focusing on humans and their relationships with each other and with non-human elements. And so just to kind of conclude here, you know, zooming in and out of those systems really crucial to identify what are the key behaviors that we may need to change, and the dependencies of the key actors, both humans and non-humans, and their influence on the adoption and the running of circular systems. I'll stop here. And there is also, I think, following that, a list of references to interesting papers that I mentioned in the slides. Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask Al whether we've just got 2 or 3 minutes, Al.
I would love it, Peter. Yes, let's take just 3 minutes, if we might, to share.
Okay, because I've been looking at the questions in the chat and I've been trying to answer as many as I can. I think this might help answer a few of those questions. So some of you probably out there thinking, this is all very well, Peter and Exeter team, you know, show us something that's really working. And more importantly, shows the evidence of the outcomes, because what we're always looking for are projects and examples where there's been evaluation that you can play back to the circular economy principles, metrics and indicators, and they're really difficult to get hold of. So does anybody remember COVID and the PPE challenge? Yes, I'm sure you do. So I'm not going to linger on this. Next slide, please. We've taken on a project 2 or 3 years ago, working with a company called Revolution Zero to see whether we could phase out single-use PPE in the NHS. And everyone says it's impossible. You can't do it for all sorts of reasons, because we have created systems in like the health service where behaviours and practices, linearity has become normalised. And that's true across many, many different sectors. The NHS is under huge stress. It generates huge amounts of waste. As we know, it's got vulnerable supply chains, and now it's got a net zero challenge. So we're trying to address a really significant problem at scale and at pace. So where does the circular economy come into this? Next slide, please. Well, what we're trying to do is overcome behaviours and attitudes towards single use, towards reuse of PPE. Single use is regarded as hygienic, safe. Reuse is regarded as unhygienic and unsafe. Single use is regarded as cheap, disposable, convenient. The opposite is true for reuse. So, you know, that's the behavioural challenge that we've taken on. So where does behaviour sit within a complete system redesign of the way that the NHS and the NHS and the health service thinks about not just single-use PPE, single-use devices that are everywhere, and where does that fit within health system redesign? Next slide, please. So the solution, you've got to design the system in which the behaviours that we're interested in can take place. And the behaviours that take place are supported by the system. Nearly everybody in the NHS who's been involved in this project over 2 to 3 years says we'd like to move away from single-use PPE, but we don't know how to do it. How do you do it? So what we need, if you go back to the previous slide from the introduction about the 4 building blocks, we've got to give attention to product design, service design. We've got to give attention to the business model. If this is going to be more expensive, no one's going to buy it. If we do introduce reuse, how on earth are we going to get this stuff back and make sure that when we put it back into the system, it's sterilised, safe, disinfected, available when you need it? And then what are all the system enablers, communication, engagement, communication, attitudes and behaviour that's going to make the system work as a whole? So this is a very, very simple graphic to show some of the components of product design, recovery and return systems. The shot on the bottom left-hand side is a novel, modular, localized laundry system for disinfection and sterilization, which moves away from the big, heavy, sort of traditional concrete and steel laundry systems that operate elsewhere, and the application of technology to enable you to track and model where products are at any point in time. Next slide, please. So what we've done, what is the pathway to implementation? There's 2 years of engagement with practitioners, patients, end users right across the health service to design single-use face masks, gowns, drapes, all the things that are used in the NHS on a daily basis, that they're comfortable, that they're the right colour, they fit many different sort of shapes of face or shapes of body, that they're we talk through all the issues around safety, acceptability, availability, cost, etc., etc. So there's been a major trial and co-design with multiple NHS stakeholders, a huge communication exercise. So if we had more time, I'd tell you a bit about behavioural chains and consumer experience and end user experience that we've been through. But that work has to sit alongside the design of a technical circular economy system, that the two work in sync, as I was trying to explain in the earlier slide. Next slide. So the killer evidence. Okay, so what, Peter? Is this better? Well, on the right-hand side are the costs and some of the performance metrics that are needed to be able to demonstrate whether the circular case is better than the linear case. So they're highlighted in red. There are other reusable providers on the market, and they're in the central column. The project we've been working on with Revolution Zero is that the carbon footprint of the reusable masks and other products are 17% of the single-use mask. The cost is typically 80%. It's cheaper. The waste levels are significantly lower. Okay, so there's multiple benefits. There's a whole series of other benefits that apply to the NHS and end users that are added to making this a successful and a scalable model. Next slide, please. 2 more slides and then we'll finish. So then the challenge is there's lots and lots of pilot projects everywhere, and one of the things we're interested in is how do you scale? So we've been working with NHS Wales, Welsh Government, NHS and others to sort of show how this could scale. So this project is now working practically and delivering these solutions to 55 NHS trusts. It's been expanded to other workwear. It's been expanded to other single-use devices. And what we've demonstrated in the report on the right is the significant contribution that this can make to Scope 3 emissions, the net zero agenda in NHS. And you could apply the same principles in any other sector where net zero and Scope 3 is becoming more and more important in the agenda. Last slide, I think. And we had some questions we wanted to ask you, but I'll hold it there, Al. So that was a rapid run through there. So I just wanted to get that in to focus and give us a point of reference for any questions.
Super. That's wonderful. Thank you, Peter, Janita and Merin. We've had lots and lots of questions, but I want to just build and ask you, I guess, if you have a key message around that case study and particularly what I think you were referring to there on understanding the wider implications of environmental impact. What do you see as the role of the circular economy in helping us assess that and ensure that we're not racing towards reduced carbon emissions at the cost of air, water pollution or soil degradation or indeed further biodiversity loss?
Yeah, great question, Al. Yeah, I think the general sort of flip saying we have is you can't recycle your way to net zero. Okay, so that's, get that out of the way. You've got to think about this more systemically. In the work we did for the NHS, we showed that, on their current trajectory of a 1% improvement every year in carbon reduction, they're going to miss the net zero target by a long way. And you've got to introduce systemic change, transformational change that addresses, it can be driven by net zero, but you've got to see it in the round. You've got to see it in all the environmental impacts, all the cost drivers, and many of the social impacts. I haven't got time to talk about the social benefits of the solution we proposed, about local economic multipliers and different ways of engaging with local supply chains. But you need an integrated model. So it's a brilliant case study, in my humble opinion, about how you bring these together in a way that can create change at scale. And remember, right at the heart of it is behavior. You've got to design the product for these very, very diverse end users with them, so that you're going to guarantee that it's going to be accepted and adopted on the coalface.
Super, that's great. And actually, I'm going to pick up on a question that's come here, and it's on a regular theme, including Angela Newton, who's shared some information here, because you touch on behaviour change. And I guess the observation is that consumers can only behave in a certain way if the infrastructure allows that. So to the panelists, the question from Angela is really around consumer behaviour changes when it's made easy and incentivized, and we understand the role of government within that. But given our society today and the barriers to adoption, what do you believe are the 3 key infrastructure changes that would have the biggest impact? And I'm not sure who of our 3 panelists would like to take that one. It's a big question, but I think an important one.
Well, I don't know whether I'll kick off. I mean, the infrastructure and the behaviour change I think has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And which aspect of the circular economy system are we talking about? So if it's consumer needing to return something, then you need an infrastructure that enables you to do that. I've always argued that the post box was a really good piece of infrastructure, that if you design a return system that enables you to put it through a letterbox and through a post box, you've already got, but often that's not thought through. In other areas, so in business to business, we're doing the piece of work at the moment on the recovery of end of life rare earth critical materials from electrification technology. We don't have it. We don't have the infrastructure. We recycle extremely small amounts of critical materials, without which you cannot have the electrification strategy that's been set out by UK government. So there's a real mismatch. In that setting, you need a massive investment in all sorts of technologies and infrastructure to enable that reverse system to be put in place and to work. Otherwise, we're exposed to hugely vulnerable supply chains for those materials at the source. So they're just a couple of examples.
Super, that's great. I am got questions coming in thick and fast here, but I'm going to move on to one around adoption and the slow rate of behaviour change. And this, Merin or Janetta, this might be for you here. So a question from Antonio Sanchez. How can we overcome the overall slow rate of behaviour change as a group, society, stroke economy? And if we had to choose just one route to achieve change as quickly as possible, would it be legal, social, educational, or another? And how might we best implement it?
Yeah, I can take some of that question. I think it's a really broad and loaded and great question. But fundamentally, we need what is the norm to change to be able to adopt circular economy as whole. So a lot of the offerings that operate in this space, so for example, in reuse space, are not adopted at scale, and they compete with something that's easier, cheaper, more accessible to consumers. And it is a big question, how do we move to a norm? Is it the case of education, or is it the case of onboarding all of the actors and showing them benefits of it? So it is I think, as I spoke about, this complex actor network in my latter slides, I think it's about everyone being involved in the adoption, and it's about us identifying where in that network do we need to change behaviors. I don't think this is a holistic answer, but there is so much to it, and I think Marin wants to jump on.
Yeah, I was just going to just follow up with that, and sort of I think, as Shanetta said, sort of identify what are the behaviors, what are the interactions, what are the relationships that exist, and the independencies between all the people working together, and to really understand, I think, what is that value exchange that you are making between different actors within that system. And if you better understand what that value exchange is, and whether or not it's worth it to each party within that, relationship that you're creating in that exchange, you have a better understanding about whether or not people will or will not do it, and what is it worth it for them to potentially change a particular behavior or a particular way of doing something. And I think that can be quite sort of really helpful and powerful when trying to sort of move us towards those sorts of changes.
Great, that's lovely. Thank you both for that. And I'm going to ask, if I might please, Mary, move on to a question from Mark Holmes. Mark's talking about product design and promotion and product durability and longevity, which we assume was always linked to quality, was actively promoted, decades ago. So how can we learn from those circumstances, and how do you think we, I would say, look to the past to learn for the future? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, there's lots of things. There's lots of things we've forgotten how to do over time, which is really interesting. And I suppose it's worth understanding, like, why did we unlearn these particular ways of doing things? What drove that? And I think quality is a really interesting element of design that can really help to drive and create better circular and better sustainable products. And we're seeing that with some of the companies that they're talking to, is that they do prioritize quality, and this ends up helping to create inherently, I think, a bit more of a more circular and more sustainable product. And so I also think, from a kind of emotion-driven perspective, when you have these elements within products, this is something that people can connect to. Quality is often a factor that's very important for consumers in terms of what they value out of a product. And so this is something that you can, potentially be used as a factor of connecting better with your customers through your product. And I think that's sort of an interesting dynamic there.
Great, thank you for that. That's super. I'm going to move on to a question for perhaps one of the panelists would let us know who you think is best placed when we think about those actors that you touched on, the role of government. And I've had a number of questions that come in on this, and I'm just going to read out, for example, given the current government, how can we push for circular economy legislation? And we know, for example, France, UAE, a number of European countries have this as legislation, standards, policies, etc. Which of you, or indeed all of you, in these last 6 minutes would like to make a comment on the role of government in helping us accelerate circular economy principles? Peter, would you like to go first, and then I'll hand over?
I can. I like when you say this government, so you mean the latest government. let's talk about the government in the round. So we did an exercise through the Circular Economy Hub this time last year, where the 5 centres and the hub came together, and we were made ministers for the circular economy for the UK. In respect of different resource flows and the economy more generally. So what we did was to put together a package of technological, economic, social, environmental changes that we thought needed to take place within policy and regulation, and the government, you know, the system enablers could influence. And that, you know, that piece of work we hope to sort of make available to other people. And I guess, and we were looking at over different time horizons, 10-year time horizons through to 2050, because some of these things take a long time to put in place. And as Marion said, it takes a long time to unpick the last 50 years and last 100 years of the linear economy. It's been enormously successful. So it's about recognizing you've got to do all these things together, and in some areas you can go quite quickly, in other areas it's really, really slow. But what you're always looking for are moments of potential transformational change, you know, whether it's a technological breakthrough or whether it's something that's happening in the economy as it is now, you know, with the cost of living crisis and so on and so forth. You know, all those moments, I think it, you know, I'm not hugely optimistic the circular economy has yet landed clearly and coherently and consistently inside government, but there are lots of pockets of really good work taking place inside DEFRA, inside BEIS, inside Department of Industry and Trade, you know, but the government's got to work as a whole. You know, it's not just a DEFRA issue, it's not just a BEIS issue, it's not just the English, you know, administration, it's all the administrations need to work together. So I think we need to, one of the roles of the hub is to bring out an integrated approach to policy and regulation for the future. And it'd be very helpful if we're able to use this audience and this sort of mechanism, Al, for as a sounding board and a sort of a contributor to that work.
Yes, that's super. Thanks. Janita, I'm going to come to you. We have just 4 minutes left. For anybody who hasn't seen it, Janetta has been posting in the chat contact information. Please do use that. Get in touch. Please share your contact details for anybody who wants to network. And Janetta, do you want to make a 1 minute point to build on Peter, or are you comfortable?
No, I think it was a great answer, but I think again, regulators have really important role in ensuring, for example, safety of how things are done, safety of packaging and so on. It's a complex role, but then also they have their own chain of behaviors and influences as to how they make decisions they make in regulating or developing policies. And that's an interesting aspect of the system also to consider. But then again, I think it's in a way, mapping those behaviors is like a Pandora box, but we do need to understand how and at which point different behaviors, different actors have an influence on how we carry the resources through different phases. That's just my point, but yeah, they have indirect influence on how things run in the system.
Super. I have just 2 minutes left before my 1 minute wrap up. Marion, would you like to add anything?
No, I was just trying to reply to one of Catherine's questions in the chat, which is about design for durability. I totally agree. I think we still know how to design for durability, but perhaps as consumers, we've forgotten what the value that durable products really provides to us.
Super. Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you as our audience. Amazing questions. I just wish we had doubled the amount of time. I'd like to thank each of our presenters, and if you haven't already said thank you in the chat, please would you? Could you also please look out for this email? We have this wonderful opportunity to participate, to take one free place in the 6-week Circular Economy Masterclass, which has been kindly contributed today. There will be an email on how to participate on that. It won't be complex. Please do get in touch and keep the dialogue going. And indeed, do let us know at the Circular Economy Innovation Network if we can help you or if there's ways you'd like to participate. I've got 11:59. I'm going to draw us to a close and repeat my thanks to everybody involved today, and particularly panelists and audience. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye, everyone.